On the afternoon I fell in the garden, knee scraped, breath caught, hand trembling around a broken trowel. I called her. The sun had already ducked behind the Douglas firs out back, and I sat there in the dirt, dew soaking through the seat of my pants, my voice barely more than a whisper into the phone. I asked if she could come by and help me stand, maybe help clean the wound. She laughed. Just a quick exhale of disbelief. "You always make things so dramatic," she said. I didn't argue. I didn't say that I'd been down there for 40 minutes, too dizzy to stand. Ants crawling across the page of my leg like I wasn't even a person anymore. I didn't tell her the hose had been left running, and the soil had started to puddle around me like some slow, quiet drowning. I only said okay, and I hung up. I'm Lorraine Holloway. I'm 69, and that was the moment I knew I could fall, bleed, cry, and my daughter would leave me there. Subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Thanks. It's strange the way a truth can land so softly and still split your life in half. Not with shouting or slammed doors, but with a laugh that says, "You don't matter like you used to." That laugh echoed in me long after the phone call ended. I remember sitting there in the garden, light fading, my fingers muddy and aching, thinking, this is how women like me disappear. I used to think I was needed. Not loved necessarily. I never craved adoration, but needed. That counted for something. I gave and they took, and that was the rhythm of our family. And then one day, they simply stopped needing. I had to crawl hands and knees into the house that evening. Pulled myself up the back steps, one at a time. I left a little trail behind me like some injured animal. The next morning, no one called to check in. My daughter, Emma, lives 23 minutes from me. Not hours, not states, 23 minutes. But even that was too far when the person waiting at the other end is no longer someone you care to answer for. I raised her. I wiped her nose. Through the flu. I braided her hair for ballet recitals. I sat up nights holding her when she got her period at school and was too ashamed to tell anyone. I drove her to her sats in a snowstorm, windshield wiper slapping ice. I stayed when her father left. I stayed through all of it. She doesn't remember those things, or maybe she does, but only as wallpaper background to the life she now believes she built on her own. I had dinner ready every day at 6. I worked at the dental office for 32 years and never once called in sick. I cashed out my pension early to help her after the divorce. Paid the lawyer's retainer in full without telling her it came from my own surgery savings. I figured I'd be fine. That's what mothers do. They stay fine. I used to imagine we'd grow closer as she got older. I thought I'd be invited into her kitchen to teach her how to make Sunday roast, or that she'd call and ask me about the ache in her lower back. But no, she Googles things now. She orders pre-made meals online. She says my advice is old-fashioned. It wasn't one big betrayal that did me in. It was 100 small ones. There was a year she forgot my birthday and didn't notice, until Facebook reminded her the day after. She posted a stock photo of a daisy and wrote, "Happy birthday to my beautiful mom," like I was just some distant aunt. There was a time she called to ask if I'd babysit the kids. Not ask, really. Just told me to be there at 7, and when I said I had an appointment, she said, "Well, you don't work anymore, so what's the big deal?" There was a moment I gave her a handmade quilt I'd been stitching all winter, and she said, "Oh, do you still sew like it?" With some ancient language. She folded it up, never once asking about the pattern, the colors, the fact that it matched her old nursery. 100 quiet hurts, that's what it was. Not enough to scream about, but enough to pile up inside you like silt in a river, until nothing flows the way it used to. And then came the final line. A month after the fall, I received a letter from the county assessor's office addressed to me, but copied to her. It was a notice about the house, my house. I've lived here since 1984. Paid every mortgage bill. Tiled the backsplash myself. This house raised 2 kids and buried 2 dogs. But now there was a lien attached, and it referenced an equity agreement I never signed. I asked her, quietly, on a Sunday when the grandkids were in the backyard. I said, "Did you put my house up as collateral for your new business?" She looked at me like I'd asked something rude. Said something about streamlining finances and we're all family. I didn't cry. I just nodded. The next week, I visited a lawyer. I went silent after that. Not in a dramatic way, not with slammed doors or speeches, just quiet. I stopped answering every text within seconds. I stopped sending birthday reminders. I stopped asking if they needed anything from Costco. I became air instead. I started setting things in motion. A new will. A living trust. A quiet conversation with my cousin Harold, who I hadn't spoken to in decades, but who, it turns out, still remembered how I taught him to drive stick shift in our old Buick. I signed everything over to him, the house, the car, the savings. All of it. In exchange, I asked only for one thing, that I could stay until I died. No rent, no fuss, he agreed, tears in his eyes. I never told Emma, never raised my voice, never told her she broke my heart. But the next time she laughed at me over the phone, I didn't flinch. I just looked around at the walls of my house, still mine, but not hers, and I felt the stillness of power. I moved differently after that. I used to think if I just kept showing up, they'd understand, that if I gave without hesitation, sacrificed without being asked, remembered every detail they forgot about themselves one day, they'd pause and see it all, see me, not as background, not as a soft cushion to land on, but as a person, as a woman. But that day never came. When Emma was born, I was 24. I still remember the way her body felt in my arms, hot and small and twitchy, like a baby bird that hadn't decided if it wanted to live or not. Her father, Joel, had paced the hospital hallway with cigarettes in his pocket. He wasn't allowed to smoke. He left 2 years later, and I never chased him. I raised her alone, worked the front desk at Dr. Bailey's dental office 5, sometimes 6 days a week. Answered phones, filed insurance claims, cleaned the break room. In the early years, I brought Emma with me, gave her crayons and crackers in the waiting room. The patients knew her by name. Some gave her quarters or peppermint candies. In the evenings, I'd walk her home. We lived in a 2-bedroom duplex just off Main, across from the railroad tracks. When the train came through at night, she used to climb into my bed, frightened of the sound. I never told her I was just scared of what would happen if I got sick, if I lost that job, if she ever stopped needing me. For years, everything I did was for her. Every check I wrote, every meal I made. I gave her the bigger slice of cake, the warmest blanket, the last clean towel. When she cried, I cried quieter. When she was tired, I stayed up. I saved the pretty things for her. When she got older, I gave her more than I could afford to. I remember when she wanted to go to that art school in Portland. I didn't have the money, but I pulled from my 401k, told her it was a scholarship, told her I didn't need much to retire on. Truth was, I hadn't even thought that far. I just wanted her to feel chosen. Then there were the birthdays. I never missed one, even when she got too old for parties. I'd still bake the same chocolate cake, 3 layers, buttercream frosting. She never said much, but she ate it. That was enough for me. There was the year she broke up with her fiancé. I took 2 weeks off work and drove out to her apartment every day just to sit with her. She wouldn't talk much, just lay on the couch with the TV on. I did her laundry, washed the dishes piling in the sink, wrote a note and left it on her fridge. You are loved. I don't know if she ever read it. When her oldest, Leo, was born, I wear upon him a blanket before he arrived. Tiny green and white squares, soft enough for a newborn skin. She never mentioned it. I saw it later in the back of the closet, folded under some old coats. I babysat whenever she asked. Birthdays, date nights, doctor's appointments. One winter, when the kids had the flu, I stayed over for 3 nights straight, sleeping on their pull-out couch with a towel under my pillow to catch their coughs. She thanked me once, texted, "Thanks, Mom," with a smiley face. That was it. When Emma decided to open her business, a boutique downtown that sold handmade things I couldn't pronounce, I showed up on opening day with a bouquet of sunflowers and a hand-painted sign that said congratulations. She hung the sign for 1 week, then replaced it with a minimalist canvas that said dream more. I don't think she noticed when I stopped bringing things. There were Christmases I wrapped every present in the living room while she scrolled her phone. I told her where the batteries were, how to open the toy packaging without scissors, how to reset the fuse box if the lights overloaded. She nodded, half listening. Her husband poured another glass of wine. And then there were the silences I kept. The times she said, "You're lucky I didn't end up a mess, considering everything you put me through." I said nothing. I stood there with a plate of roasted carrots in my hands, and smiled like I didn't feel it splinter something inside me. The times she snapped at the kids in front of me, short, sharp commands that reminded me of her father. I never said a word. I just took them into the other room, read them stories, let her cool down. I took it all, the cold shoulders, the forgotten thank yous, the assumptions that I'd always be there, that I had nowhere better to be. I never asked her for anything, not until the fall. That was the first time in years I said, "Can you help me?" And even then, I asked gently, like I was interrupting. Sometimes I wonder if she ever really saw me past the role. If Mom was the only name I'd ever have in her eyes, not Lorraine. Not the woman who gave up evenings and dates and vacations to be sure there was always a home-cooked meal on the table. Not the woman who canceled her gallbladder surgery so she could watch the kids while Emma traveled for work. I don't think she knows any of that. Or maybe she does. Maybe she remembers everything. Maybe it just doesn't matter anymore, and the hardest part is I didn't give to be thanked. I didn't tally receipts. I did it because I thought love worked like that. You pour, they drink, you give, they bloom. But now, I see. Some flowers only grow toward the sun, and some people only love what reflects them back. What I gave to Emma, the years, the tenderness, the fierce loyalty, I don't regret it. I just wish she hadn't mistaken my love for an obligation. Because the thing about giving is, it becomes invisible when it's constant, when you're always the one holding the safety net. No one ever thinks to ask if you're okay, and by the time they do, you've already stopped reaching out. They say a mother's love is unconditional, but they never say what happens when the conditions come from the child. I didn't stop loving her. I just stopped offering it where it would never be seen. The fall in the garden didn't change everything. It only made visible what had been true for years, that I could bleed in front of her, and she'd think I was being dramatic, and from that moment on, something in me went still. It was the beginning of my silence, not out of spite, not as punishment, but as a way of surviving. Because after you've given everything, your time, your body, your years, and they still look at you like a burden, you realize the only thing left to give is your absence, and even that, they won't notice. Not until it costs them something they can't get back. It never happens all at once. Not the erasure, not the forgetting. It's slow, methodical, so quiet. You don't even know it's happening. Until one day, you look around and realize you're not a person to them anymore, you're a fixture. A hallway light they pass by without flipping on. It started, I think, the first time she called me extra. That was the word. "You're being a little extra, Mom." It was about something small, a suggestion I made about Leo's speech delay. I'd mentioned, gently, that he might benefit from some early intervention. She rolled her eyes, said I was overthinking, that she'd already looked into it. Then, "You're being extra." That word stayed with me, extra, as an unnecessary, as an excessive, as in too much. From that day on, I started shrinking myself. I stopped giving advice. I nodded more. I asked fewer questions. When she seemed overwhelmed, I offered to take the kids, and when she didn't respond, I stopped offering. I thought maybe if I became smaller, quieter, more convenient, she'd let me stay close. Instead, she began pulling further away. Phone calls grew shorter, then less frequent. I used to talk to her every other day, 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there, just enough to know she was okay. Then it turned into once a week, then maybe once every 10 days. If that, if I texted first, if I didn't sound too needy. I remember a Sunday morning when I called just to say hello. She answered on speakerphone. I could hear dishes clattering, cartoons in the background, her husband asking something from the other room. She didn't say she was busy, she just kept talking to other people. While I was still on the line, eventually she said, "All right, I've got to go," and hung up. That was it. No "How are you, Mom?" No "Do you need anything?" I sat there for a long time after that call, staring at the coffee going cold in my cup, realizing that I had become something she answered out of obligation, a phone buzzing in her pocket, Something to be silenced. It wasn't always like that. She used to send me photos. The kids at the park, their first days of school. Finger paintings taped to the fridge. I'd print them out, tape them to my own refrigerator. But then the photo stopped. Not all at once, just slower, further apart. And suddenly they were gone altogether. I didn't want to ask why. I didn't want to seem extra. Then came the holidays. They got harder every year. Thanksgiving used to be at my house. I'd start prepping 2 days in advance. Sweet potatoes, green bean casserole. That cranberry sauce from scratch she always pretended to hate, but always ate 2 helpings of. Then, one year, she told me they'd be hosting at their place instead. We just want to make it easier for you, she said. You've done it long enough. That sounded kind. But I knew it wasn't about making things easier. It was about making them different, without me at the center. So I brought a pie that year, just one, store-bought. When I walked in, the table was already set. They bought catering from a new organic place. Nothing homemade. Not a single familiar smell. The kids ran past me without hugging hello. I remember standing in the corner of the kitchen, watching my daughter laugh with her friends. They were younger, polished, louder than me. One of them was feeding her baby avocado with a tiny gold spoon. I had nothing to say. So I took my coat off slowly, hung it behind the pantry door, and sat down near the end of the table, where no one really noticed. It was easier that way. That Christmas, she sent me an Amazon box. I hadn't told her what I wanted. She hadn't asked. Inside was a pair of slippers and a travel mug. No card, no note. I held them in my lap for a long time, trying to feel anything. I didn't. The worst part wasn't the gifts or the missed calls. It was the sense that I had become someone she pitied, that slow, invisible pity. I could feel it when she dropped the kids off and say, "Let me know if it's too much," as if I might forget how to care for children. I could feel it when she introduced me to someone as my mom. She's kind of old school. As if I were an antique. There were visits where I'd talk and she'd nod without listening. Visits where I brought up memories and she'd change the subject. Visits where I mentioned her father, and she'd sigh and check her phone. I used to keep little notebooks of things to tell her, bits of news, stories I read, recipes she might like. I'd bring them up, one at a time, in case she was in the mood to talk. Eventually, the notebook stopped getting filled. One time, I made a dish she used to love, chicken pot pie with a homemade crust. She picked at it, pushed it aside, and said, "Ugh, carbs. Sorry, Mom, we're doing paleo now." I scraped the leftovers into the trash after she left. My hands were shaking. Another time, I gave her a bracelet I found at the flea market, real silver, delicate, something she would have loved once. She looked at it, smiled, and said, "You always give me the most random things," then left it behind on my kitchen counter. The small cuts hurt the most. There was a week she canceled 3 visits in a row, saying things had gotten crazy. When she finally came, I had a peach cobbler cooling on the counter. She didn't touch it, just said, "Oh, I'm trying to cut sugar." Then she left after 20 minutes because the youngest had dance class. No hug goodbye, just her perfume lingering in the hallway like someone had walked through and disappeared. Even the grandkids, I don't blame them. They're too young, but they started calling me Lorraine. Not Grandma, just Lorraine. I think they picked it up from hearing her say it. It hit me in a way I didn't expect, like I was no longer part of their origin story. Just a woman who sometimes watched them when their parents were busy. These aren't crimes. I know that. They're not dramatic betrayals. They're just shifts. The kind you don't notice unless you're paying attention. And I've always paid attention. It's 1,000 small turns away from love, from need, from recognition. Until one day, you're not standing in the circle anymore. You're watching from outside, holding a casserole dish that no one asked for, listening to your own voice disappear beneath their laughter. They think they know you, but they only know the version of you that serves them, the woman who opens her wallet, her door, her arms, the one who says yes even when she wants to say no, the one who forgives without being asked. They don't know the woman who sits alone at night, listening to the same voicemail on repeat just to hear someone say her name. They don't know the woman who used to sing lullabies under her breath in a 2 bedroom duplex, praying she wouldn't get laid off. They don't know what she held back, what she gave up, what she's still waiting to be thanked for, and maybe they never will. But I know. I've been her my whole life. Some lines once crossed. Don't make a sound. No crash, no scream, just a silence that changes everything. It was spring when it happened. The kind that doesn't look like much at first, still a bit of snow in the shade. But the air has softened, the daffodils by my mailbox were blooming, and I remember noticing that the grass needed mowing again. I'd gotten a letter in the mail. Nothing unusual at first glance, just one of those cream-colored envelopes with my name typed neatly across the front. No return address. Inside was a notice from a financial institution I didn't recognize. It thanked me for setting up an automatic withdrawal from my home equity line of credit. It was written as if I'd requested it, authorized it, only I hadn't. I stared at the paper for a long time. My first thought was that it was a mistake, maybe a scam. But the numbers were right, my address, my loan, my name, and Emma's. To list it underneath as an authorized user, I felt something tighten across my chest. But I didn't panic. I called the number listed on the bottom of the page and asked calmly for more information. I gave them my details, waited on hold, my hand shaking a little as I held the phone to my ear. The woman on the other end was pleasant. She told me the account had been modified for weeks ago, that a new access line had been opened under a joint authorization, and yes, my daughter's digital signature was on file. Did she have my permission? I asked. There was a pause, a rustle of papers. It was authorized under power of attorney, the woman said. You granted her that 2 years ago. I hadn't. At least I hadn't meant to. My mind scrambled back to the fall before last. Emma had brought over a stack of papers for me to sign. She'd said they were just updates to the emergency contact forms and something about getting ahead on paperwork in case anything happened to me. I remembered the moment because she brought lemon bars that day. I hadn't had lemon in years. She'd handed me a pen. I hadn't read every page. I trusted her now. I sat at my kitchen table, the light slanting across the tile floor, feeling like a fool. A deep, old kind of foolishness, the kind you carry in your bones when the people you've built your life around show you in black and white that your trust was a currency they spent without asking. I didn't call her right away. Instead, I pulled out a showbox I kept in the closet, one filled with old tax returns, property deeds, savings bonds, the kind of box you build over a lifetime, the kind you hope your children won't have to dig through after you're gone. I checked every signature, every copy. The power of attorney form was there. My name, her name, both in ink, not forged. Not exactly, just unspoken. The betrayal wasn't the signature, it was the knowing. She knew I didn't understand what I was signing. She knew, and she let me because it was easier, because it served her over the next few days. I learned what she had done. She had taken out money, not a lot, but enough to feel, enough to matter. She'd used it to make a down payment on a new storefront location, something bigger. She'd said in her social media post, a space to grow. I read the caption twice. She didn't thank anyone by name. I looked at the photos. There she was, smiling in front of the glass doors, the children beside her, holding scissors for a ribbon cutting. I wasn't there. I hadn't been invited. The grand opening had already passed. I found out about it from a neighbor who'd seen it in the paper. That night, I sat alone in my living room, the sound of the refrigerator humming in the background. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel sad. Just tired. The kind of tired that comes when someone looks at your life and sees only leverage. I wanted to call her, ask why, ask how she could take something so fundamental, my home, my security, and treat it like a stepping stone. But I didn't. I didn't want another laugh, another sigh, another line about how I was overreacting. Instead, I opened a drawer and found my old address book, the paper one. I hadn't used it in years. I flipped through the pages until I found the name of the lawyer who'd helped with Joel's estate. After the divorce, I called the next morning. We met later that week. She remembered me, said I looked well. I didn't bother with small talk. I handed her the documents, the notice, the forms Emma had given me. She read everything slowly, lips pursed, occasionally glancing up at me with something that wasn't quite pity, "We can undo this," she said, and in that moment, something steadied inside me. Not anger, not revenge, just a quiet resolve. I told her I didn't want to fight. I didn't want a war. I just wanted to be safe. I wanted to protect what was mine, what I worked for, paid off. Kept standing 3 years of cracked pipes and patched roofs and lonely nights. The lawyer nodded. We began the process. Quietly, legally, I made changes, small ones at first, then bigger. I updated my accounts, moved things around, created buffers. I revoked the power of attorney and replaced it with someone I trusted, not family, but someone steady. And I signed over the house, not to Emma, not to anyone who expected it, to someone who had earned it in a different way. I did all this without a word to her because words wouldn't have mattered. She would have turned it into a misunderstanding. She would have smiled, made excuses, called me dramatic. She might have even cried, not because she felt sorry, but because I caught her and I couldn't afford to be guilted out of my own survival. That was the final line. It wasn't the paperwork. It wasn't the money. It wasn't even the storefront or the lemon bars or the missing invitation. It was the realization that she didn't see me as someone whose consent mattered. She saw me as an obstacle to work around. That's what changed me after all the years. All the care, all the soft, daily ways I tried to matter. It was a signature. That broke the spell. And from that moment on, I stopped being afraid of losing her. Because somewhere along the way, without saying it out loud, she had already left me behind. After I signed the papers at the lawyer's office, I didn't speak to anyone for 3 days. Not in some deliberate, dramatic way, just silence. It came naturally. Like breath slowing after a long run, like a room settling after company leaves. I moved through the house as if it were hollow, though everything inside was still mine. The furniture, the books, the dishes I collected over a lifetime. But I didn't touch much. I didn't open the blinds. I sat a lot by the window, near the kettle, on the porch step when the wind softened. It wasn't grief. Not exactly. It was the absence of noise after you stopped trying to be heard. I didn't return Emma's texts. There weren't many, a quick hey one afternoon. Then a photo of the kids at the beach, nothing with weight, nothing with an apology. I read them. I didn't respond. It wasn't punishment. It was preservation. For once, I needed to see what it felt like to belong to myself. No obligation. No emotional acrobatics, just stillness. I used to believe silence was dangerous, that it meant you were giving up, that to love someone meant always reaching back, even when they pulled away, especially then. But now I saw the truth of it. Silence is not surrender. Silence is a choice. And I was learning how to live inside that choice without crumbling. Each day, I did one small thing for myself. Not for a performance, not to prove anything, but because I was still here. I brewed real coffee instead of the instant stuff Emma always said was fine. I sat in the backyard and listened to the birds like they were speaking directly to me. I took my time folding towels. That week, I found a letter Joel had written me before he left, tucked behind a cookbook I hadn't opened in years. His handwriting was messier than I remembered. The letter wasn't long, just a few lines about how he wasn't built for fatherhood, how he hoped I'd forgive him eventually. I folded it back into the spine and didn't cry. Some things don't need forgiveness, just distance. I started sorting papers, not just legal ones, but old birthday cards, photos, receipts. I found a note Emma had written when she was 9. It said, "I love you more than stars. You are my best girl." I pressed it into a new folder I labeled Keep. There weren't many items in that folder, but the ones that made it and felt earned. The lawyer called me a few days later to confirm the transfer had gone through. The house was no longer in Emma's reach, not without permission, not anymore. My cousin Harold would hold the title until my death, as agreed. He called me afterward, said he was honored to be trusted with something that mattered so much. "Take your time," he said. "You don't owe anyone a thing." I didn't expect that to move me, but it did, just a little. I hung up and stared at the kitchen clock. I realized for the first time in years I didn't feel owned. I had no plans to tell Emma what I'd done. Not yet. Maybe not ever. My silence wasn't a game. It wasn't a tactic to pull her back to war guilt. I simply didn't have any more to explain. I didn't have the strength to narrate the pain I had already swallowed. When she did eventually call, a week or two later, I let it ring. Then again and again, I watched the name light up on my phone. Each time it went to voicemail. I felt my chest loosen. She didn't leave a message, not once. And that told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't calling to ask if I was okay, she was calling to smooth something over, to pretend none of it had been real. Maybe to get ahead of a problem she suspected, but hadn't confirmed. I went grocery shopping one morning and bumped into a woman I used to work with, Linda, from the dental office. We stood in front of the canned soup for 10 minutes, and I listened to her talk about her daughter's wedding. She asked about Emma. I lied. I said she was busy, doing well, probably too busy for her own good. Linda smiled and said, "Well, that means you did something right, doesn't it?" I didn't answer. Just pushed my cart past the powdered gravy packets and picked up a can of navy beans I didn't really need. People love to believe that distance between a mother and her child means success, that the child has flown, grown, conquered. No one talks about the mothers who are left behind in that process, who are erased while their children write new, sleeker versions of their past. In my silence, I started to remember myself, the woman I was before I became a role. Lorraine, not mom, not grandma, not fixer, not helper, not safety net, just Lorraine. She was quieter than I remembered, but steadier, too. I cleaned out the garage that month, boxed up Emma's old books, trophies, art supplies. I didn't throw them away. I just labeled them and placed them on a high shelf, out of reach, out of sight. It felt ceremonial. I donated clothes I hadn't worn in years, made a folder of passwords, watered the plants, sat through thunderstorms with the lights off, and I wrote, not in a journal, not for posterity, just scraps of things on the back of grocery lists and envelopes. One note read, "What happens when they only remember you when you're useful?" Another, "What if being needed isn't the same as being loved?" These thoughts weren't sharp. They weren't even bitter, just honest. I was building a new kind of truth, piece by piece. I didn't know if Emma noticed I'd gone quiet. If she did, she said nothing. No visits, no messages longer than a few words. I think she assumed I was sulking, waiting for her to fix it. But I wasn't waiting. That was the difference. Waiting would mean I still hoped. I didn't. Not anymore. There was something liberating in that. Not hopelessness, but a kind of freedom that comes when the last rope slips from your hand and you realize the thing you were holding onto wasn't saving you. It was drowning you. In that silence, I found my footing. I started to learn how to be alone without being lonely, how to feel invisible without disappearing, and slowly, quietly, I started making plans. Not big ones, not revenge, nothing petty or cruel. Just movement, forward, not back, because silence, when it's chosen, becomes a path. And I was ready to walk mine, alone if I had to, but never again unheard. There's a stillness that comes after the breaking, a hush that settles over your life when you stop trying to stitch the old seams closed. I didn't expect it to feel like peace. I thought it would be loneliness or regret, but it wasn't. It was air, real air, like finally cracking open a window in a house that's been sealed too long. I moved differently after that. Not dramatically, not with flair. I didn't pack a suitcase or announce anything to the world. I simply started making different choices. I stopped waiting for her to call. That was the first change. It sounds small, but it wasn't. I used to check my phone, like it was a lifeline waiting for her name to pop up, for the tiny hope of reconnection. I stopped doing that. I started leaving the phone in another room when I made my tea. Turned it off some nights altogether. The silence used to be unbearable. Now, it was just another sound I got used to. I found a new routine, one that didn't orbit around her life. I woke up when the sun cracked across the shed-out back. I'd stretch, let my feet find the cool floor, and make myself breakfast that didn't revolve around what anyone else might want. Real eggs, toast with too much butter, strong coffee in the chipped blue mug I'd had since 1989. It's strange how grounding it can be to just make something for yourself. I started walking again. Not power walking like the women in the neighborhood with their headphones and quick strides. Just slow walks through the side streets. I noticed things I hadn't before: a porch swing left to sag, tulips pushing through someone's fence, an old rocking horse half buried in a yard 2 blocks over, I walked not to get anywhere, but to be somewhere. My body moving without permission, without purpose, without being anyone's mother or reminder or burden. That's what freedom looks like, I think, not loud, just unclaimed. There was a man who ran the little hardware store down on Meadow Lane. I'd been going there for years, but I'd never really seen him. His name was Richard, though everyone called him Rick. He was kind in the way that doesn't announce itself. He always offered to carry the potting soil to the car but didn't insist if I said no. One morning, I went in to replace a garden hose nozzle. It had cracked at the base, sprayed water up into my face, and I laughed out loud in the yard. Not because it was funny, but because it felt like some ridiculous metaphor for my life. Rick asked how my day was going. I said, better than last year. And for a second, we just looked at each other like two people who understood something unspoken. He didn't ask what happened. That's what made it easier. A few weeks later, he waved to me from his truck as I walked past. We started talking in short bits: weather, planting seasons, whether or not the city was going to pave the pothole by the library. Nothing deep, nothing expected. But there was a calm to it, an ease I hadn't felt in years. He reminded me that not all relationships are built on taking. Some just exist, quietly, alongside you. I didn't need a new best friend. I wasn't looking for romance. I'd had all the chapters I needed in that department. But I liked the way he remembered my name, the way he said it with no baggage attached. Lorraine, not Mom, not can you, not will you, just Lorraine. I started taking better care of the house, not because I owed it to anyone, but because I wanted it to feel like mine again. I painted the hallway a soft sage color. I fixed the hinge on the back gate. I took down the old pictures not out of bitterness, but because they no longer reflected the life I was living. I kept a few, tucked in a drawer. I'm not made of stone. The room that used to hold Emma's things became something else. Not an office, not a guest room, just a place with light. I put a chair in there, a lamp, a quilt across the back of the seat. I started sitting in that room in the evenings, watching the trees move through the window. I'd bring a book, sometimes, or just let the silence fill in the gaps where conversations used to live. I also began writing more, not in any formal way, just notes, thoughts, observations. I kept a stack of paper by the kettle, wrote on the back of receipts on napkins. I didn't care if it made sense. I just wanted my voice to live somewhere other than in my chest. Sometimes I wrote to Emma, not to send, just to understand myself. Things like, I would have given you everything. I almost did. But I couldn't keep giving you my dignity too. Or, I wasn't angry you took from me. I was broken by the fact that you didn't think I'd notice. These weren't letters, they were echoes, fragments of what I wished I'd said years earlier. Back when I still believed that love could protect you from being used, I didn't stop loving her. That's the hardest part to explain to people. Love doesn't vanish when someone lets you down, it just changes shape. It gets quieter, less generous, it curls in on itself and learns how to exist without expectation. That's what I carried now. A quiet love. One that no longer begged to be seen. Some afternoons I'd pass by her new storefront. I never went in, I didn't need to. I'd look through the glass, see the plants lined up in the window, the neat little displays of handmade soaps and eco-friendly lotions. I'd see her, sometimes, laughing with a customer, or bent over a clipboard. She looked happy, or maybe she looked busy. These days, it's hard to tell the difference. I never stayed long. I'd nod to myself, keep walking. Feel the gravel shift under my feet. I didn't feel jealousy. I didn't feel pride. Just a distant kind of wondering, like looking at a house you once lived in, now painted over in colors you wouldn't choose. That's what it became, I think. She was a place I used to live. I moved differently now because I had to. Because I couldn't keep circling the same emotional drain and calling it loyalty. I didn't know anyone might collapse, and I had more life left than they'd made room for. Every day I lived quietly. They lost the version of me that would have kept showing up no matter how small they made me feel. And I was beginning to understand that this quiet, deliberate existence wasn't a consolation prize. It was a reclamation, not a reinvention. Just a return to myself, to the parts of me that were never allowed to breathe in her presence. I hadn't planned on changing anything. But once I started living like my peace mattered, everything did. It wasn't immediate. That's the thing people don't tell you about walking away, how slow the impact rolls on you. Imagine doors slamming, voices shouting down a hallway, people begging for you to stay. But real absence doesn't scream. It hums, and when you've been everything to someone, the planner, the buffer, the one who remembers where the spare keys are and how to get blueberry stains out of a cotton blouse, your absence doesn't always look like heartbreak. It looks like inconvenience. Small cracks where your quiet presence used to hold everything together. I saw it happen. Bit by bit, Emma stopped asking for things because I had stopped offering. Not in a loud way, just in the way water eventually stops pouring from a faucet once a well runs dry. The first ripple came through someone else. My neighbor Carol called me one morning. She said she'd run into Emma downtown, that Emma had been trying to find a last-minute babysitter. She'd mentioned her usual options weren't available, and muttered something about Mom being on her own kick lately. Carol laughed when she said it, not unkindly, but with that knowing tone older women have when they recognize something another woman has chosen not to put up with anymore. She seemed a little lost without you, Carol said. I didn't say anything, just listened. That same week, a box showed up on my doorstep. No note, just a package with a fancy skin cream I knew I'd never use. I imagined Emma ordering it on her phone between errands. I imagined her thinking that softness could replace substance. I left it on the counter for days before finally giving it to the woman at the pharmacy who always asked about my garden. Then there were the school events. I used to be the one who sewed Leo's costume for the spring play. I still had the little lion ears from last year in my sewing drawer. This year, no one asked. I watched a clip on Facebook of the performance. Leo wore a paper hat made from construction paper that sagged at the corners. I didn't feel pride or pity, just a dull ache. The kind that shows up when you realize you've been edited out of someone's life. But the role you played was never fully recast. Then came the birthday, not mine, Emma's. She always hosted her own something small, curated, usually with finger food and filtered photos uploaded to her shop's social media. This year, I wasn't invited. Not officially. I saw a post the morning after, her friends all smiling. My grandkids sitting at the edge of the group, half distracted by something off camera. A few people in the comments asked, "Where's your mom?" No reply. I didn't need one. I didn't want a seat at the table that only existed for appearances. Because when you've been present your whole life, and one day you're simply not, the people who relied on your invisibility start to notice in strange, uncomfortable ways. I stopped sending holiday reminders. No texts about when daylight savings time would end. No casserole on New Year's Day. I didn't reach out to ask what the kids wanted for Easter. Didn't send my usual hand-painted eggs, and no one asked why. That's the part that always caught me off guard. They didn't come rushing back. Not because they didn't care, but because they didn't know how to care in any other direction than toward themselves. What they lost wasn't dramatic. It was practical. Emma missed appointments because I wasn't there to remind her. School forms were returned late. The garden at her storefront started to wilt. She posted a call for help looking for someone who knows perennials. I smiled. Not because she struggled, but because I remembered the way she used to roll her eyes when I told her how to deadhead marigolds. What she lost was steadiness, consistency, the quiet muscle of a mother's memory. The kids started forgetting to wave to me when I passed them downtown. They'd look, pause, unsure whether they should, not because they didn't love me, but because Emma hadn't told them what to feel. And when children don't know how to name a silence, they absorb it like mist in the air. One evening, Rick and I sat on the back porch. He'd helped me repair the gutter earlier that day, didn't ask for anything, just brought his tools, and a quiet willingness to stand on the ladder I no longer trusted with my own weight. He asked if I missed them. It wasn't cruel, the way he asked, just honest. I said yes. Of course I missed them, but I didn't miss being used. I didn't miss the kind of love that required me to disappear to make others feel full. I missed the version of Emma that used to fall asleep on my shoulder in the passenger seat. I missed being called on the way home from the grocery store just to tell me the kids had said something funny. I missed the days when my existence was met with delight, not duty. But those were gone, and if they came back now, I wouldn't know if it was for me or for what I could give. So I stayed quiet, I stayed separate, and they began to feel it. Not like thunder, not like grief, more like an empty drawer you keep opening, forgetting it's no longer filled with what you expect. Emma texted one night, "Do you want to come over for Sunday dinner?" I stared at it. I didn't reply right away, because something in me knew it wasn't a step forward, it was a reset button. I hoped that if she just invited me once, I'd slide right back into place, bring dessert, help with dishes, pretend nothing had happened, but something had. And once you've learned what it costs to be quiet in a room that erases you, you don't go back just because they remembered your name. They lost me slowly in the missed calls, the unchecked assumptions, the belief that I'd always show up because I always had. And now, I live in a house with fewer expectations and more light. I speak when I want to. I show up only when my presence is invited, not presumed. I am not waiting to be wanted. And what they lost wasn't loud or final or cinematic. It was the woman who knew their schedules better than they did. The woman who forgave without being asked. The woman who remembered the birthdays no one else did. The woman who stayed, even when she was invisible. She's gone now. And in her place is someone quieter, firmer, and far less willing to be erased. I didn't write it all at once. It came in pieces over weeks, sometimes at night, sometimes in the middle of folding laundry, once while I stirred a pot of soup. That didn't taste quite right. The words showed up without asking permission. They weren't elegant. They weren't neat. But they were mine. The letter wasn't for her. It wasn't even for the version of her I missed. It was for me, the me that had stayed too long, given too much, said it's fine 1,000 more times than she should have. I started with the truth I'd never said aloud. I wanted to be seen. That was the first line I wrote, on the back of an envelope from the electric company. I kept it on the table for days, staring at it every time I passed by. I'd never admitted that before, not to Emma, not to myself. I'd told myself that love didn't need recognition, that giving was its own reward, but it wasn't, not entirely. I wanted to be seen, fully, as someone who had thoughts, feelings, a pulse that beat outside of the service I provided. So I kept writing. The pages came slowly, some days just a sentence. Other days a whole memory would rise up and spill across the lines like water from a broken pipe. I remembered how she used to squeeze my pinky finger when she was little. Not my hand, just the finger, said it was her safe hold. I wrote about that. I wrote, "You stopped reaching for me a long time ago, but my hand stayed out just the same." I wrote about the fall in the garden, about how cold the dirt was against my skin, how I waited, more embarrassed than afraid, how I felt something shift that day that couldn't be unshifted. I wrote, it wasn't the fall that hurt. It was realizing that if I hadn't gotten up on my own, I'd still be there. That sentence stayed with me. It made the paper feel heavier. I didn't write to accuse. I didn't list grievances. This wasn't a record of wrongs. It was a release, a way to lay down the weight of being invisible in someone else's story. One page I filled entirely with questions I knew she'd never answer. Did you think I wouldn't notice? Do you remember who I was before you needed me? Did you ever wonder how much I gave up so you wouldn't have to, not to shame her? Just because those questions had been living inside me for years, and I wanted them somewhere outside of my chest for once. One morning, I walked out to the shed in the back corner of the yard. It still smelled of dust and old paint the way it always had. I opened the letter, now almost 20 pages, hand written in looping script, and I read it aloud to no one. To the rafters, to the squirrels in the trees. I read every line, my voice cracked in places. When hoarse in others, by the end, I was sitting on the wooden floor, the paper trembling in my lap, the air heavy with everything I'd never said. I didn't feel lighter right away. Sometimes catharsis is quiet. It doesn't sweep through you like a wave, it drips. It drips slowly until, one day, the ground beneath you is finally soaked enough to grow something new. I folded the pages carefully. I thought for a moment I might send it. I even addressed an envelope, but I didn't put it inside. Instead, I burned it. That wasn't the plan. But when I looked at the letter, the ache of it, the gravity of all that need, I realized I didn't want it to be a bridge. I didn't want her to read it and apologize, or worse, dismiss it. I wanted it to be done. So I lit a match, held it to the corner, and watched as the flames curled the edges. I stood in the backyard as the smoke carried all my unsaid things into the air. I didn't cry. I just stood there, barefoot in the grass, letting the silence be enough. Afterward, I swept the ashes into a tin and buried them beneath a rosemary bush. I told myself it was a kind of burial, not of a relationship, but of the version of myself that kept waiting to be chosen. That night, I slept better than I had in months. In the morning, I sat in the chair by the window, the one I'd moved into Emma's old room, and watched a hummingbird hover near the feeder I'd hung last week. I hadn't told anyone about it. It was just for me. That mattered more than I expected. When people talk about letting go, they make it sound like a single act. But it's not. It's a decision you make over and over again, until it finally holds. I let go in pieces, through every page of that letter, through the matchstick, through the silence that followed, and with every moment I didn't reach back, didn't explain, didn't justify. I reclaimed another inch of myself. I don't know what Emma thinks now. I imagine she tells herself I'm going through something. Maybe she thinks I'm angry. Maybe she's waiting for me to cool off. But I'm not angry. I'm just done. That's the difference. People don't see. Anger expects something. Silence expects nothing. And what I found in that nothing was a kind of wholeness I'd never allowed myself to feel before. Because the truth is, I had written hundreds of letters over the years, in casseroles, in school pickups, in the way I folded her laundry just the way she liked, even when she was grown, in the way I said yes without being asked. But this letter, the one I never mailed, was the only one I'd ever written to myself, and it said, "You were always enough, even when they couldn't see you." That was the letter that changed me. Not because it fixed anything, but because it finally told the truth to the one person who needed it most. My mornings are slower now. Not the tired kind of slow, but deliberate, full. I wake with the sun. Not an alarm. I stretch in bed for a while before I rise. I let the quiet hum of the house greet me, floorboards settling, birds tapping at the feeder, the soft click of the heater warming the baseboards. I no longer move because someone is waiting on me. I move because I want to. I make my tea in the old kettle, the one with the tiny chip on the handle that Emma once said made it look sad. I've always liked it. It reminds me that things can be a little broken and still do what they're meant to do. I sit by the window with a thick pair of socks on and a notebook close by. Sometimes I write. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I just stare out of the rosemary bush where the ashes of my letter rest, and watch the way the light lands on the leaves. There's peace in watching the same patch of grass change every day. I never used to see it. Back then, I was always hurrying, cooking, folding, worrying, listening for the door to open, waiting for someone to need me, to call, to forget something only I remembered. That kind of vigilance wears on you, makes your life shrink to the size of someone else's chaos. Now, there's space. I walk to the library once a week, just because I can. I take the long route through the park. I don't wear headphones. I listen to the sounds of the world, leaves rustling, dogs barking, a child asking 100 questions his father doesn't answer. Sometimes I'll pause at the pond and watch the ducks glide across the water like they own it. At the library, I pick up books I've never heard of, memoirs from strangers, gardening guides, books with titles that make no promises. I read them slowly, like each page deserves to be heard. There's no one here who rushes me. Rick still comes by sometimes, not every day, and not in any way that makes me feel obligated. He helped me fix the screen door last week. We shared a sandwich afterward and sat on the porch watching a summer storm roll in from the east. He talks more now, about his sister in Montana, about the fishing trip he's thinking of taking but probably won't. I don't ask questions unless he offers. We sit well in silence. That's rare, I think, to find someone who can exist next to you without filling the space with noise. We're not anything, Rick and I, at least not in the way people usually measure things. But there's a steadiness between us, a shared understanding of what it means to have been sidelined by the ones you loved most, and to have found something worthwhile after. Emma hasn't come by. It's been months now. She sends the occasional text, brief, polished. Hope you're well. The kids say hi. Let me know if you need anything. I don't reply to all of them. When I do, It's measured, kind, but distant. Like the version of myself I'm willing to share now only fits through a smaller door. She did stop by once. Left a box on my front step, some cookies the kids had made. A card that said thinking of you. I stood inside and watched her car idle for a minute before driving off. She didn't ring the bell. That's all right. Some connections don't heal. They just change shape. She'll learn that one day. Maybe when her own children are grown. Maybe when they leave and she realizes she's waiting on a call that doesn't come. I don't wish her pain. I only hope, when that moment arrives, she'll remember the hands that always reached out for her even when they were tired. I don't need her apology anymore. I used to think closure looked like a conversation, a reckoning. But now I understand it's quieter than that. It's a gate you close behind you without slamming it. I still love her. That hasn't gone anywhere. I've just stopped leading with it. Now, I lead with my own breath, my own rhythm. I write in the afternoons sometimes. I started piecing together the little notes I wrote during my quiet years. I don't know if it'll become anything, a book, maybe, or just a collection for no one. That's the beauty of doing things for yourself. They don't have to be seen to be real. The garden's coming back, stronger than ever. I dug up the patch behind the shed and planted lavender this time. I like the way it smells when the breeze catches it. It feels like a kind of prayer. Not the begging kind, the grateful kind. The kind that says, I made it, I didn't lose myself. Not all the way. Sometimes I think back on the day I fell in the garden. How small I felt, curled into the earth. How foolish, how humiliated. But I also think of that moment now as a door. Everything before it was noise. Everything after was truth. The fall wasn't the end. It was the beginning of remembering who I am when no one's watching. I am a woman who raised a child alone, who paid every bill, who sewed every costume, made every dinner, kept every secret that needed keeping. I am a woman who learned the difference between being needed and being loved. I am not bitter. I am simply not willing to spend what time I have left trying to earn space in someone else's life. The life I have now is not loud. It doesn't sparkle on the surface. It won't go viral. But it is real. It is rooted and it is finally mine. I walk barefoot in the grass when it rains. I take naps when I feel like it. I let the soup simmer longer than necessary just because I like the way the house smells when it cooks, and I write. Not because I need to be heard, but because I like the way it feels to speak to myself, finally, with care. I keep a quote above my desk now. I found it in a book about wildflowers. Even untended things bloom when the soil is good. That's what I've become. Not untended. Not wild, just finally growing where I was never given room before. My life is quiet now. And that's enough. I wasn't angry. I was finally empty. And that was beautiful. It's evening now, the kind where the sky goes a deep blue, gray before surrendering fully to the dark. I've always loved this part of the day, the pause between the noise of the world and the quiet that comes. When everyone settles in, the birds are quieter now. The wind carries a soft scent of pine and something faintly sweet from the honeysuckle I planted last year. I'm sitting on the porch, a blanket over my legs, a cup of warm chamomile in my hand. It's become a ritual, my small way of saying, I'm here. I'm still here. A lot of people think healing looks like a restart, something flashy or sudden. But that's not how it was for me. My healing came in increments. In trimmed hedges and clean baseboards, in declining invitations that came with conditions, in long walks without a destination, in sitting still. I've spent so many years rushing to fix what wasn't mine to repair, tending to fires I didn't start, keeping plates spinning in rooms I wasn't even welcome in. That kind of life teaches you to survive, but it doesn't teach you to rest. I had to learn how to rest and to trust that rest doesn't mean uselessness, it means presence. There's a quiet pride in living a small, whole life. I didn't expect to make it to this part of the story with peace. I expected more ache, more grief. I thought I'd lie awake most nights asking what I could have done differently. But I don't, because when I trace it all the way back through the garden, through the calls she laughed through the papers I signed without reading, I realized something simple. I showed up. I showed up, over and over again, for Emma, for her children, for a husband who left, for friends who drifted, for strangers who needed more than they gave. I kept showing up even after I was no longer seen. And now, I show up for me, some afternoons. I bake just because the house feels better when it smells like something warm. I write letters I don't send still. But now, they're more forgiving, not because I've forgotten, but because I'm no longer holding pain like it's currency. I had a dream recently in it. Emma was a child again, barefoot, running through the backyard in a white dress that was too long for her. She turned to look at me, her face lit by sunlight, and said, "Are you watching?" And I was. I always had been. I woke up crying, not because I missed her, but because I realized that part of me still believed she might turn back one day, look around and see what she left behind, not in guilt, not in need, just with eyes finally clear. That hope doesn't rule me anymore. But I won't lie and say, it's vanished. There's a part of me small, quiet, that still keeps the porch light on, not as an invitation, but as a truth, because no matter how many times they choose not to come home, it matters that there was a home, that someone kept the light burning long enough to say, "You are loved here," even when you forgot how to receive it. That's the thing I've learned. Some people don't know how to love in return because they've never paused long enough to see the cost of being loved so well. I don't say that in bitterness. I say it because I used to be one of them. When I was young, I didn't thank my own mother the way I should have. I took her softness for granted. I assumed she'd always be there because she always was. And she was, right up until she wasn't. Her silence wasn't cold, it was final. And now I understand. I understand what it costs a woman to give everything and still be looked through like frosted glass. I understand what it takes to step back without slamming the door, to let people feel your absence without announcing it. I understand what it is to live the last years of your life not in bitterness but in full breath, filled clarity. I don't need them to say thank you anymore. I don't need to be remembered at holidays, or invited to every gathering, or asked for advice. What I needed, I gave myself. I gave myself rest. I gave myself boundaries. I gave myself permission to stop shrinking in order to fit into spaces that never made room for me. The kids will grow up. They'll have their own stories. Maybe one day, they'll ask about me. Maybe they'll sit at a kitchen table and ask Emma, "What was Grandma like?" And maybe she'll say she was quiet, she kept things together. We didn't always get along, but she never stopped loving us. That would be enough. Or maybe they won't ask. Maybe my name will come up in passing, tied to a recipe, or a story about an old house, or the way I used to hum when I did the dishes. That would be enough, too, because I no longer measure my worth by how tightly people hold me. I measure it by how freely I let them go. I've learned how to exist in my own company, without the sharpness of loneliness. I've learned how to be still without waiting sometimes. I still hear her laugh in my head the way it sounded on the phone that day when I asked for help. It doesn't sting like it used to. It's just a memory now, a signpost on a road I no longer travel. I don't answer calls that come from a place of convenience anymore. I don't step back into roles that cost me more than they return. I am not angry. I am not hard. I am not lost. I am here, living a small life quietly, watering the garden, baking bread, writing letters, watching the sky change, and keeping the porch light on, not because I expect her to return, but because I know now, without question, I was never the one who left.